I'm online.
Dr. Rohan Chawla, welcome to the session, and I request you kindly lead the session. All the speakers kindly take a note. For your presentation, you shall get 12 minutes of time, and then we have total of 15 minutes for the panel discussion, the time allotted for the panel discussion. So I request Dr. Rohan to kindly take the lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you AIOS for giving us this opportunity. So good morning, everyone, and today I hope I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. So we have this instruction course on clinching a diagnosis in retina, and a lot of imaging modalities have come up in the past which help us in making a diagnosis, an etiological diagnosis, a morphological diagnosis. So we thought that we'll discuss some of these modalities and some of the common diseases. So without wasting much time, I invite Dr. Abhidnya, our first speaker, who is a retina specialist currently working in Maharashtra and did senior residency at AIIMS at RP Center with us. And she's one of our very good senior residents. And she'll tell us something about OCT and OCT angiography. OCT is probably one of the investigations which has dramatically changed retinal practice in the last 2 decades. So let us know some of the new things that it is telling us. Over to you, Abhinya. Can you share your screen, please? Dr. Abhinya, are you there? Dr. Abhinya, are you there? I think we've started 2 minutes before time. Should
Sir, can we take another speaker and then maybe we can take Dr. Abhinya sometime later?
Okay. Okay. So we'll talk of OCT a little later. Before that, let us go to the second talk, which is on central serous chorioretinopathy, where sometimes imaging may suggest an alternative diagnosis. So for that, I invite Dr. Neha Goyal, who is also practicing retina in Delhi for quite some years now and a very prolific retina surgeon. Yeah, Dr. Neha, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohan. Am I audible?
Yeah, okay. Please go ahead.
So I thank you for letting me be part of this instruction course. And I'll be talking about central serous chorioretinopathy. Imaging may suggest otherwise. So first, let us look at what is central serous chorioretinopathy. Basically, it is choroidal congestion and hyperpermeability, which results in focal RP defects and a serous pigment epithelial detachment and or a neurosensory detachment. So it is more common in males, but this gender predilection decreases with age. Older patients are more likely to have a bilateral disease. Now, CSC presents with certain typical features on imaging, which include gravitational tracts on fundus autofluorescence. Apart from the PED and NSD, subretinal fibrin, elongated photoreceptor outer segments, and in chronic cases, outer retinal atrophy and cystoid changes on OCT. FFA can help to prick up the leak at the level of the RP, and ICGA confirms the choroidal venous dilatation, vascular congestion, filling delay, and hyperpermeability, which underlies the basis of this disorder. So let's look at a typical case. This was a 50-year-old male. Right eye was asymptomatic, 6/6, and showed this serous PED, which we can see on FAF, FFA, and ICG. And the OCT also confirms this. This was the other eye of the patient, which was a chronic CSC picture. Here you can see the autofluorescence changes, the pinpoint leak on the FFA, and the choroidal vascular dilatation and hyperpermeability. This is the OCT scan, again showing a thicker choroid and the elongated photoreceptor outer segments pointing to the chronicity. So as per the current nomenclature, CSC has been included in the pachychoroid disease spectrum, which is characterized by reduced fundus tessellations, a thick choroid, which may be focal or diffuse. Here you have a loss of the small and medium choroidal vessels and dilatation of the large choroidal vessels, which are called pachy vessels, which is highly apparent when you compare this to a normal OCT scan. Now let's look at some cases which appeared to be CSC, but then we realized it was something else. This was a middle-aged female who complained of suboptimal visual gain after cataract surgery. Visual acuity was 6/12. There was a PCL in C2, no anterior segment complications. This is the fundus autofluorescence. You can see stippled hyper and hypoautofluorescent areas. And this is the OCT showing a NSD along with some dilated outer choroidal vessels. FFA, again, stippled hyperfluorescence. And look at the OCT angiography. There was a small tuft of new vessels present here along with the high flow, which made us revise the diagnosis to a pachychoroid neovasculopathy. And in fact, if you go back and look at the scan, you will see a subtle double layer sign here overlying this pachy vessel. Now, this disease is again part of the pachychoroid spectrum and is nothing but a type 1 or sub-RP neovascularization over an area of increased choroidal thickness and dilated vessels. As opposed to ARMD, these patients are younger, they do not have drusen, and of course, no myopia. So the clinical significance of this disorder is that it could be a form truste of PCV, and the management is different from CSC in that you need anti-VEGF treatment. Another case which presented with the neurosensory detachment on OCT, this was a middle-aged female with decreased vision to 6/24. But look at the clinical picture. In addition, you have disc hyperemia, yellowish lesions over the macula with subretinal fluid, and FFA showed the typical early hypo and late hyperfluorescent pattern. The disc was also hot. So this suggests this is an inflammatory disorder and not CSC. Further looking at the OCT, you will see that there is choroidal elevation and thickening, and these multiple septate neurosensory detachments, which are typical of VKH syndrome. Now, again, it's important to recognize because the management is different. These septate NSD are in fact bacillary layer detachment, which is a split in the inner segments of the photoreceptor layer between the myoid and the ellipsoid zone. And it has been increasingly realized that this may be a surrogate for underlying choriocapillaris ischemia. Now, you can see that with appropriate immunosuppressant therapy, there is a good anatomical and functional outcome. Now, this is the third case, a young male with decreased vision in the right eye to 6/36. And again, you see a neurosensory detachment. You may be tempted to make the diagnosis of CSC. But what about this elevation? Look at the fundus picture. And this was actually a granuloma. This can be related to tuberculosis or to sarcoidosis. And here we clinch the diagnosis by the other eye, which also had pigmentary changes suggestive of ocular TB. The Montu was raised and the HRCT showed lymphadenopathy. He was started on steroids along with ATT, leading to a resolution of the granuloma as well as the neurosensory detachment. Another patient with decreased vision in the left eye, 6/12, headache. And here again, on the OCT, you see a CSC-like picture. There's a neurosensory detachment. What is different on OCT? On FFA, you see no leak, just pinpoint hyperfluorescent spots, a bit of hyperfluorescence at the disc. So what guides you here is the headache. A CSC should not be accompanied by a headache. And the other thing is, if you look at all the OCT scans, you see these undulations in the RP choriocapillaris complex. So this should prompt you to order a B scan, though it's not very clear in this scan, but this was a case of posterior scleritis. It's important to recognize because up to 50% cases are associated with the systemic disorder such as rheumatoid arthritis, granulomatosis, or polyarthritis nodosa, especially in a middle-aged female. And for the management, you need oral steroids or immunosuppressants, much on the contrary to a regular CSC. Now let's look at this case. This was another elderly middle-aged female with decreased vision in her left eye. She was a myope and the vision was 6/18. This is the vertical scan on the OCT, again showing you a neurosensory detachment and some photoreceptor outer segments elongated over here. The FFA and ICG just show stippled hyperfluorescence and hypercynescence respectively. Now, what next? What should you do in this case? So always remember that you should check out all the scans of the OCT, not just the vertical, but also the horizontal scan. So on the vertical, what looks like a CSC, in fact, is a dome-shaped macula with subretinal fluid, which you can only pick up if you do a horizontal scan. So OCT angio, which showed absence of any neovascularization. So what is a dome-shaped macula? It's an inward deviation of the macula with respect to the chorioretinal concavity, usually seen in myope, as in this case, though it can also be seen in emmetropes. Younger age and longer axial length are the risk factors. Now, this is important. The dome can be horizontal, vertical, or round. So if it is horizontal, you need a vertical scan to diagnose, which is the most common. If it is vertical, you need a horizontal scan to diagnose. And if it is a round, it can be picked up on both the scans. Now, the scan should be of a sufficient length as well. Here you see it's missed on a horizontal scan. Can I request the rest to please mute them? Yes. Here it's missed on a vertical scan. And here you see if it is not of a sufficient length, then it will be missed on both the horizontal and vertical scan. So the take-home message is you must do at least one horizontal and one vertical OCT of sufficient length, especially in a myope, to detect a dome-shaped macula. Now, the natural history encompasses an increase in the height of the bulge with time as a result of the deepening of the surrounding cephaloma. This is not accompanied by a hypermetropic shift. Now, SRF without CNV is the most common and resolves over time in over half the patients, though it can leave RP atrophy. The management is same as CSC, but the prognosis is much more varied. So again, to repeat, what looks like a CSC flat irregular PDs on a vertical scan turns out to be a dome-shaped macula on the horizontal scan. Another condition that should be kept in mind is the tilted disc syndrome, which presents very much with a dome. But the differences are that there will be. Can the host please ask the remaining to mute themselves?
I use this thing. It has the clamp at the bottom, and I can put my phone up here.
Mr. Vinod, can you please? Okay, thank you. So a differential in this case is the tilted disc syndrome, where you see more tessellations in the inferior fundus compared to the superior. You'll also see a tilted disc with the intranasal crescent or a conus and situs inversus of the retinal vessels. So the cephaloma is only inferior in this case. The lesions are similar to a dome-shaped macula, as you see in this case. But the shape of the dome is more circular in dome-shaped macula, whereas it is more eccentric in a tilted disc syndrome. Another condition which should be kept in mind is a ridge-shaped macula seen in younger patients with high myopia, where the elevation is only seen in the vertical scan. Now let's go to our next case, which clinically presented with an NSD, where you again may be tempted to make a diagnosis of a CSC. But look at the infrared image of this 60-year-old male with decreased vision in his left eye. Here at the top, you see some hyperreflectance on the near infrared reflectance image. This should prompt you to go ahead with a FFA and or a ICG. And here you see a well-circumscribed lesion in the superior part of the fundus, which had very early filling on ICG. Now, this is a classic choroidal hemangioma. And again, it presents with the neurosensory detachment, but there will be an elevation on the OCT as well. Here you see some RP deposits, which account for this hyperreflectance on NIRA. This patient did well after PDT. So at this time, I'd also like to put in a word about paraproteinic maculopathy. So paraproteinemia is seen in multiple myeloma, immunocytoma, and Waldenström macroglobulinemia. Though it usually presents with venous testis retinopathy, rarely you can have only a serous macular detachment mimicking a CSC. It may be unilateral. So the key point here is the absence of angiographic leakage. And you must remember that the height of the SRF is directly proportional to the IgM level in the blood. So these are some of the pictures that you can see where you get these high NSDs and some hyper reflective deposits on fundus imaging. Now, this is important because it can be a clue to a systemic malignancy, and in conjunction with the hemato-oncologist, the patient definitely needs plasmapheresis and rituximab or chemotherapy. So this is something which should not be missed. Now, this is my second last case, a young female with decreased vision in her right eye, visual acuity of 624. Here you see NSD where you can see all the borders on EST, So what is this? Look at the fundus picture. You see some RPE changes, but look carefully at the disc. There is a disc pit, and this is a case of a disc pit associated maculopathy. Now, here again is a clinical indicator. If you see the horizontal scan, the vertical scan is showing only the NSD, but the horizontal scan is showing some vitropapillary traction at the edge of the disc and some inner retinal schisis in this area as well. So we have seen a considerable number of cases of disc pit presenting only with subretinal fluid, and this was a case of double disc pit.
Doctor, so
Now-
sorry to interrupt, but you need to sum up within 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. So this is in contrast to Linkoff's theory, who said there should be a schisis followed by an outer retinal hole for this SRF to accumulate. These cases show that fluid from the pit can directly go to the subretinal space as well. Now, this is the last case. What would you do next when you see this OCT picture? You think of a CSC and maybe do FFA. Look at the fundus. Here you see some retinal striae, but always remember to do a distant direct ophthalmoscopy whenever you have an NSD on an OCT whose margin you cannot see. This is actually a case of a very shallow superior retinal detachment with the dialysis in a young male. Another pointer on OCT is these inner retinal folds that you will see, which again point that this is in fact a shallow retinal detachment, which you should not miss. So to conclude, there are a host of systemic disorders associated with the neurosensory detachment. You can have lesions similar to CSC, which can be neovascularization, inflammation, tumors, or malignancy, a surgical condition such as an RD, or other rare ocular disorders such as a dome-shaped macula or a optic disc pit. It's important to recognize these because the management differs and the prognosis also differs. So a host of ocular and systemic disorders with varying management and prognosis can present with the neurosensory detachment on OCT. Subtle signs on OCT and diligent interpretation of all the scans can point towards an alternate condition other than your knee-jerk reflex, which would be a CSC. A careful clinical history examination in conjunction with appropriate imaging modalities can help clinch the correct diagnosis and institute the appropriate management on time. Thank you for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Neha. That was a very nice talk and very nice cases. You have illustrated a lot of examples where fluid under the macula is not CSC and can be so many other things. And so rightly, the message that you have given is that if you just see fluid under the retina in one scan, that is not the end of it. You have to do a full clinical examination, take a history, and there can be a host of conditions which can mimic this and which can cause just fluid under the retina, which can range from optic disc pit to inflammatory conditions to even malignancies. So I think if anyone has some questions, you can put up in the chat box and we'll try to answer. Let's move on to the next talk. Dr. Abhidnya, are you ready now? She came online, but I think she's having some problems with the internet. Okay, we'll go on to Dr. Vinod. So Dr. Vinod is Associate Professor at RP Center, AIIMS, and he will tell us something about OCT angiography, where it is helpful and where it is not. Yeah, over to you, Dr. Vinod.
Thank you, Dr. Rohan. So I hope my screen is visible and I am audible.
Yeah, very clear. Go ahead.
So I'll be speaking on optical coherence tomography, angiography in choroidal neovascularization. So is it useful or can it be misleading also in certain times? So I'll be sharing few of my cases to highlight this same. Now, OCTA we know is the latest advancement in the retinal imaging, what we call as dial-less angiography. But it is useful in, it is said that it is especially useful in detecting CNVMs, which are otherwise difficult to detect because of the FA features. For example, conditions like MACTEL, pachychoroid, and AMD. So let's see these spectrums one by one and how OCTA helps or it confuses us. Now, this is a patient who came to us, 36-year-old male, known case of CSC, visual acuity was 6/9. We did OCT, and if you see, there is some serous PED and some SRF here, and a little bit of hyperreflectivity in the sub-PED area. Now we do a FFA Now, FFA does not tell you much because there's a little bit of hyperfluorescence which refuses to change in the late phases. Now, if you do Octa, again it does not show much, but if you go carefully through the Octa, you see some bit of flow lesions over the area of this PED. This does suggest that patient is developing some sort of lesion, neovascular lesion, and it can be seen on the on-fast images of Octa as well. So lesson we learn from here is that Octa can show us tiny hidden CNVMs in certain scenarios. Now this on the other hand is an elderly patient with good visual acuity, and again patient with CSC, as can be seen on autofluorescence imaging. You can see some pigmentary changes over here. OCT very clearly shows pachyvessels in the outer choroid and the attenuation of the inner choroid, and in the retina we see flat irregular pigment epithelial detachment. Now very interestingly, Octa does show us very clear cut defined membrane in this condition, and which is visible on the B scans. Though whether we want to treat this CNVM as of now would be a matter of debate, but lesson we learned from this condition is this case is that Octa can show us CNVMs in places where we do not suspect also. Now this is another patient, again looks like CSC, if you see, and left eye was normal, right eye shows us some kind of subretinal fluid. When we do FA ICG, we can clearly see that on ICG we can see some membrane over here. On FA we also see stippled fluorescence which increases in the late phase, and ICG also shows some lesion which is simulating CNVM. Now this patient on Octa shows a very clear cut CNVM. This patient underwent 2 injections of Avastin, initially showed no response, underwent 1 Eylea, little bit of response, but the patient failed to respond to treatment. So at this juncture, we offered the patient half fluence PDT, and the patient improved with total resolution of the fluid. So basically what we are dealing here was nothing but bit of RP atrophy through which we could see choriocapillaris, which simulated the appearance of CNVM. So basically this was a case of CSC with RP atrophy, and this case tells us that all CNVMs which are visible on Octa may not be actually CNVM. Coming to the second spectrum is Mectel type 2. Again, Octa has been found useful in detecting CNVMs in these cases, predominantly because FFA, because of the leakage itself, can confound the presence of CNVM. Now, have a look at this particular case. This is no dilemma here. Clear-cut case of type 2 Mectel, right eye 6/18. Left eye, there is obvious CNVM, which is visible on CNVM. OCT as well. On FA, you can see typical type 2 Mectel in the right eye, and left eye shows leakage, which is suggestive of CNVM, and which is visible on Octa as well. But now this case is a little different. If you see here, elderly lady with 6/12 vision in the right eye and 6/12 parts in the left eye. OCT features are very typical of Mectel type 2, where we see interretinal hyporeflective spaces and retinal thinning. Now, interestingly, when we did Octa in this particular patient, we saw a very clear network of vessels, both in the outer retina as well as in the deep retina. And to our surprise, this patient, we did not offer any treatment as there was no fluid, but this network did not change even after 2 years. So lesson we learned from this patient is that Octa, especially in Mectel, can detect CNVMs which do not change over a period of time. Another female patient with Mectel, again, it does not show any signs of CNVM either on FA, OCT or Octa in the right eye, but in the left eye, you can see there is some bit of hyperfluorescence which leaks in the late phases. Now on Octa, we can clear cut see a CNVM which is there in the deep retina, in the outer retina, sorry. And when we followed up again this patient over a period of 2 years, this complex increased in size, and again it increased further at 3 years. But if you see, there is no fluid and the clinical picture remained the same. So again, Octa will show us CNVMs in patients of Mectel, which enlarge with time, but without any significant clinical change. So basically, I'm trying to highlight a set of cases where the CNVMs can be picked up on Octa, but our management does not change just based on the Octa findings. So this is a typical patient with myopic CNVM, very easy to detect, a subfoveal hemorrhage, a CNVM on OCT scan, and leakage on FFA, and which is very clearly seen on Octa as well. Now this here everything goes in tandem, so very easy to interpret the findings. So the CNVMs which are visible otherwise can be easily seen on Octa also, and that is how Octa will help you make your diagnosis easier. But look at this patient. Now this patient is a case of high myopia. She had been referred to us for non-response to 3 injections of intravitreal anti-VEGF. The AF shows some hyperfluorescence indicative of chronic fluid. FA does show a pinpoint leakage, and OCT again is suggestive of intraretinal hyperreflectivity and some subretinal fluid, which suggests of CNVM with subretinal fluid. We again gave this patient anti-VEGF, and in fact the fluid increased. At this juncture, we did Octa, and Octa did not show any CNVM complex at all, and this remained the same even some time later. So at this time we went back and saw the images again. We saw that the superior retina was not tessellated, but the inferior retina was tessellated, and this contour abnormality could also be seen on OCT. So we revised our diagnosis to tilted disc syndrome, and we had contour related maculopathy in this patient, and because of that this patient had SRF, which was chronic. So lesson we learned from this patient is that Octa may help the refute of suspected CNVM, refute the diagnosis of suspected CNVM in certain subset of patients. Now this is another myopic patient. You see subretinal hemorrhage over here, and if you see clinically carefully on OCT picture, there is some localized hyperreflectivity within this subretinal bleed. And on OCT scan, if you see Octa scans, you can see flow in this particular lesion, suggesting that this subretinal bleed is because of the CNVM, and it is not a Cohen hemorrhage. So Octa can help us show hidden CNVMs in patients with myopia. This is my second last case where, and this is a patient where again we have a subretinal hemorrhage, some ill-defined leakage on FFA, but Octa does not show any CNVM. Neither it is seen on Octa B scans. So again, Octa helps us refuting the diagnosis of CNVM in patients with myopia. This is my last case. If you see, this is a patient with clear-cut CNVM. There's a bit of fluid on OCT, and Octa also shows CNVM. But since this patient was asymptomatic, and if we go back to history, this patient had idiopathic CNVM and had 2 anti-VEGF injections, and the last injection was 6 months back. This just signifies that this is a stable CNVM and does not need further treatment. So lesson we learned from this patient is that all CNVMs of Octa which are seen on Octa do not need treatment, and clinical details of the patients are paramount. So to conclude, Octa is a useful modality for detecting and for detecting the presence of CNVMs, and it also helps us refute the diagnosis of CNVM in certain scenarios. All CNVMs which are seen on Octa do not need treatment, and clinical history along with other investigative modalities help us in final diagnosis and decide in planning the further management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. So Dr. Vinod has highlighted how Octa in a non-invasive manner can help us identify these choroidal neovascular membranes. But he has also highlighted that this is a new technique and one needs to be very careful in its interpretation some of the flow areas where we see, which we can pick up, may not actually need treatment. And some of them are the ones which need to be treated. And which ones actually need treatment comes only with experience. And sometimes we do tend to make a mistake and we would overtreat also. But if we are not seeing an adequate response to our anti-VEGF, then probably it's a good idea to reevaluate the case. And Dr. Vinod, like you showed in that case of parafoveal telangiectasia, the membranes which were stable, I felt that those were quite well-defined membranes, thick ones, the vessels. So I think these are the vessels which probably can be followed up, and somehow they don't leak unless the RP decompensates too much later. And even in your last case,
one of the cases where actually the membrane was increasing in size. So that is something which would concern me. If it is stable in size and mature vessels, then it's okay. But if the membrane is actually increasing in size, so that is something which is, I don't understand why it should increase in the size as well as remain stable.
Yeah. So these are some unanswered questions, but yes, the answer to that at present is close follow-up. And if we see any clinical changes, especially in vision, metamorphopsia, or any fresh hemorrhage coming up, then it probably becomes an indication for an anti-VEGF. And also the last case which you showed, where after the anti-VEGF, we are seeing that the choroidal neovascular membrane has now gone under the retinal pigment epithelium and the RP is covering it. So I have seen this in some cases, and I'm now referring it to rather a RP healing response. And I think it's seen more in myopics and idiopathics. And when this happens again, I feel that the need for injection is less, even if your octa is still showing the membrane.
I think again that is one of the factors, because most of the CNVMs, when we inject anti-VEGF, the first to respond is type 2 CNVM, the component which is above the RP. So once that regresses, in certain areas at least the RP covers well, and then but the mature vessels are going to remain forever. So these are the cases which do not actually need injection in the long term, and we must take into account the patient's complaints as well as the other features like fluid on OCT, whether it's present or not.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vinod.
Thank you.
Okay. Now I think we have Dr. Abhidnya. So we'll go back to our first talk of OCT. Yeah, please, Dr. Abhidnya.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. Sorry for the inconvenience because of the internet connection. And I'll just share my screen. So my screen is visible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rohan sir. Thank you, AS, for this opportunity. And I will be talking on OCT and OCT imaging opening the new horizons. So we all know the various uses of OCT, and the international nomenclature for OCT have described the various layers from posterior cortical vitreous to the choroid scleral junction. And this correlates very well histologically also. A simple CME have been described, showing inner retinal changes to outer retinal changes to changes in the photoreceptors layer, the stages, and here we see a simple CME on the ENFIS pattern. Now, this was a recent study where they studied the vitreous using OCT in younger individual and compared those with the older individuals. The upper images are those of a younger individual where the various bursa, cistons, and the prevascular fissures are very prominently seen and were not connected, while the lower images are of an older individual where these are disorganized and also interconnected. This is the vertical scan image also showing the same. Coming to the surface disorders, we have epiretinal membrane, which is a hyperreflective membrane with multiple tractional points. And this can further cause various traction at the inner layers and outer layers, leading to decrease in vision and metamorphopsia. Now, another one to differentiate from this is lamellar hole associated epiretinal proliferation, where a medium hyperreflectivity is seen at the surface of the retina, along with the connection near to the molar cells. Hence, these membranes are usually sticky and they are difficult to peel. One has to keep this in mind while operating such cases. Now, suppose that there is a young patient who comes with ERM. And the OCT shows such a picture where there is inner retinal distortion and hyperreflectivity present in the form of sawtooth appearance and bounded by the outer plexiform layer. This has been termed as omega sign and is a feature of combined hematoma of the retina and retinal pigment epithelium. Now, in case of a simple myopia, a naive person might just lose out any changes at the posterior pole. But OCT does shows these changes very prominently, like focal traction, causing inner retinal and outer retinal problem, the presence of the subretinal fluid in this case, and the development of the macular hole. Also, these cases may be associated with foveal schisis. After the surface and tractional disorder, we come to the contour disorders, where like dome-shaped macula. Now, in dome-shaped macula, there is elevation in the posterior staphylomatous area, and this is prominently involving the macula area. And we also see the choroidal thickening at the area of the elevation. Now, sometimes these lesions may be considered as mass, which may even be seen on the ultrasonography. One must know this entity to distinguish it. Now, OCT is a characteristic feature. Sometimes what happens that this may be a spherical or vertically oriented or horizontally oriented dome-shaped macula. And sometimes if you do only a single scan, you might miss this finding. Hence, a multiradial imaging must be performed to identify them. Now, these cases may also be associated with subretinal fluid or RP alteration, and this may be the reason for the vision loss in these cases. Also, they may be associated with foveal schisis. Now, here you see at the area of the elevation summit, the height of foveal schisis is less. This is because of the buckling effect of the macula. Another contour disorder is a tilted disc syndrome, where a horizontal scan may show a normal scan, but when we do a vertical scan, the shallow staphylomatous area in the inferior nasal is prominently seen. Now, you see the abrupt change in the choroidal thickness at the edge of the staphyloma, and this is at this age that there are outer retinal changes present, and they may present with macular changes. This is one of the cases where tilted disc syndrome had presented with myopic traction maculopathy. Coming further, we'll talk about the choroidal cavitatory disorders, one of which is the peripapillary intrachoroidal cavitation. Now, clinically, we see that there is a yellowish elevated area in the peripapillary area, and when we do a OCT, we see that there are choroidal defects present, which is very well documented on the 3D OCTA. Now, why to diagnose this? Now, this patient may also have glaucoma-like defects, but it is not because of the glaucoma, it is because of this peripapillary cavitation. Sometimes they may be associated with retinal detachment, retinoschisis without any break. Not to also, one should not confuse them with hemangioma or granuloma. Another disorder is the focal choroidal excavation, where there is thinning and excavation of the choroid. Now, if the retinal layers do not conform with it, and there is a septation in the retinal layers, this is known as the non-conforming type. Whereas if the retinal layers follow the same choroidal excavation, it is said to be conforming type. One of the important factors is that the sclera is usually normal thickness and has normal contour. Now, this focal choroidal excavation could be present in the peripapillary areas, and usually they may be associated with CNVM. Hence, these cases need to be followed up regularly. Other cases where we could see focal choroidal excavation is the osteoma or the Stargardt disease, Best disease. Another entity is the choroidal caverns in age-related macular degeneration. Mostly they are seen in geographic atrophic areas. However, they do not have any prognostic significance, but one should know these findings. Coming to other changes in ARMD, we have outer retinal tubulations in neovascular MD as well as geographic atrophic areas, where you see hyperreflective structures with hyperreflective borders, and usually they are seen in the outer retinal area. This are suggestive of the outer retinal tubulations. These are the photoreceptor degenerative changes and are usually associated with poor prognosis. This can be associated in other retinal dystrophies also, like in this case, which was a Vitis crystalline dystrophy. Now, drusenate deposits are very well documented on OCT, and depending upon the location, you can classify them. So usually in subretinal drusenate deposits are associated with formation of neovascularization, and they should be followed up regularly. Also, atrophy has been classified recently into various stages, where depending upon the RP and outer retinal involvement. Stage A is where there is complete RP and outer retinal atrophy, whereas stage B is where there is incomplete involvement of both these structures. Now, a further classification where there is intactness of the RP, but the outer retina is involved. That is whether it is complete or incomplete, it is further classified. Further changes could be associated with SRIM, that is subretinal hyperreflective material, which is usually seen in neovascular AMD and often persists after anti-VEGF treatment. The composition varies with time and usually composed of fluid, fibrin, blood, and choroidal neovascular membrane. The height, greater the height of the SRIM and greater the width, poorer is the visual prognosis. Another entity you've seen with AMD is the multi-layered PED. This is a choroidal elevation with hyperreflective and hyporeflective band, and in some cases they may be associated with a prechoroidal cleft. The prechoroidal cleft may be indicative that the visual prognosis may be good in these cases. However, recent studies have showed that this hyperreflective band may be a precursor of fibrotic scar, and these cases may have poorer visual prognosis. Now, in PCV, we have seen OCT shows us various signs like double layer sign, thumb-like PED. In addition, sometimes when there is bleed also, it shows us the area of the bleed, the PEDs which are present. And this may also help us in the prognosticating and managing the patient further surgically. After AMD, we have the diabetic disorders, and OCT has been used as for biomarkers to prognosticate the cases. One of them is the disorganization of the retinal layers, where within 1 mm of the fovea, the inner retinal layer, if disorganized, they usually have a poor prognosis visually in future. Another various disorders described are the hyperreflective foci, which are present in the inner retinal layers and may extend to the outer retinal layers and further, and usually they do not have any shadowing. Now, the association with visual acuity of hyperretinal foci is not very well known, and but they are known to respond well with steroids. Now, this was a case of this was the series of cone dystrophy which we had analyzed, and various stages were seen from a foveal cavitation only, where the ELM external limiting membrane was intact, to the severe involvement where there was thinning of all the layers. And we had seen that in early stages, clinically, the patients may not show any features, but this was the sign which was present in the early stages on OCT. Coming to AMN and PAM disorders, where there is perifoveal lesions, where the lesions are extending towards the fovea. On FAP, fluorescent angiography, there may be minimal changes, or there could be hypofluorescence present. And on OCT is the main thing which differentiates the two. In AMN, it is involvement of the outer plexiform layer and the ellipsoid zone hyperreflectivity. While in PAM, that there is outer plexiform and inner nuclear involvement present. On OCTA, we see that there is perivenular fern-like pattern. OCTA has been now a direless angiography known to everyone, shows the various layers to us and have been used in CNVM detection. Now, this was a case where there was a
Dr. Vidya, you can go on calmly. We have enough time. Don't worry.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So this was a case where there was a right eye scar present, and in left eye, there were subretinal drucinoid deposits with subretinal hemorrhages. And when we saw that we did a fundus fluorescent angiography, we saw that there was dilatation of the vessels and leak present, and OCT showed intracystic fluid compartment with hyperreflectivity in one area. When we did OCT of this patient, we saw that there was a choroidal neovascular complex present in the vascular complex present in the deep layers. Now, this was suggestive of retinal angiomatosis proliferans. Now, this was another case where there was a pigmentary changes at the posterior pole, and when we did OCT, we saw that there was a foveal cavitation present. OCTA showed a vascular network in the deep layers, whereas other layers were normal. This was idiopathic parafoveal telangiectasia. This was another case of IPFT, where fluorescent angiogram showed a leak in the perifoveal area. And the OCTA showed a vascular network in the deep as well as choriocapillaries layer. So when we compared both OCTA and fluorescent angiography in cases with diabetic retinopathy, we saw that most of the features were very much prominent, including the microaneurysm, the CNP areas, and the choroidal neovascularization. Thus, OCT and OCTA together have helped us to identify various points in different disorders and have helped us to understand the pathophysiology and understand the disease in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abhidnya. So as she has shown us, OCT can help you detect findings right from the vitreous to the choroid, and it has shown us many things in the choroid which we were unable to see earlier at all. And OCT angiography has also added to our knowledge about the various levels of vasculature in the retina. So any comments? Dr. Vinod, would you like to comment any special?
नहीं सर, वो कुछ ना कुछ कमेंट देने को बोल देंगे.
No, Dr. Vinod, please go ahead. Would you like to tell us something more about the choroidal imaging, how OCT has helped you?
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Could you enlighten us a bit about how OCT has enhanced our knowledge about the choroid and what extra information we can get from there?
I think the difference it has made is that from the diagnosis point of view, we are much, there are many more cases where we're looking at choroid now in the OCT. So take, for example, one is pachychoroid spectrum, of course, but I think more utility there is in terms of diagnosis. One, few of the patients who would probably earlier we would diagnose as pigment epitheliopathy or idiopathic CNVMs. Now with the help of EDI OCTs, we know that they are part of the pachychoroid spectrum. Probably we are dealing with pachychoroid neovasculopathy or pachychoroid epitheliopathy. Another set of disorders, for example, inflammatory disorders, very common is BKH. We know that the retinal manifestations occur after the choroidal manifestations. So the patients who are well controlled on therapy, no intra or subretinal fluid, so they tend to have choroidal thickness increasing first as compared to the subretinal fluid. So if we are carefully following up these patients, we know that if the choroidal thickness is increasing, this is the one of the earliest signs of recurrence of these patients, and probably we need to step up our immunosuppression. So that is one setup of disorder. Another set of disorders is probably those where we have thin choroid. For example, myopia. So there we know that a host of choroidal abnormalities which we could not earlier see on time domain OCT. A lot has been mentioned in all the talks about dome-shaped macula and all those things, contour-related maculopathy. So all these things are better visible on EDI or swept source OCT, and we can better manage our patients in all.
Thank you, Dr. Vinod. So overall, it has definitely helped us diagnose and improve the management of our patients. Dr. Neha, are you there? Would you also like to make a comment on how OCT is helping us in our practice?
Yes, sure, sir. In fact, am I audible?
Yeah.
So in fact, having all of us worked on time domain as well as spectral domain, and now on swept source OCT, we have actually seen the evolution and seen the difference that it makes. You know, sometimes I go back and see my old scans of patients which were done without EDI or without swept source, where the choroid was just, you know, a dark land, and it actually feels a bit handicapped. To be confident about the diagnosis or about the management. So I would say yes, definitely EDI is now a must, even in our routine management of day-to-day cases, and hopefully in the coming time, Octa will be able to also make its place in such a way where we would be more clear as to what the relevance of the things we see on Octa are. But yes, definitely the visualization of the choroid and also of the vitreous is becoming indispensable now, at least for retinologists.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Neha. So actually, I even tell my residents that sometimes you see a lesion on the fundus and you actually don't know what is happening. And you do an OCT and you come up with a diagnosis. So that is where they should go back and correlate so that next time directly on the fundus examination, they will be able to identify that, yes, this is what I saw earlier, which OCT told me, and this is the correct diagnosis, even if I don't have an OCT. So it is helping us both ways. And I was just listening to some other lecture where people were advising an routine OCT scan before any cataract surgery. I think I would little be wary about that, and I still want my PGs to learn good skills of a fundus examination and not take OCT as a replacement for a good fundus examination. Any comments?
I think there would be a set of patients where you would detect certain abnormalities on OCT, even if you do amongst normal patients or the ones which are undergoing cataract surgery. No doubt about that. It will detect some changes. There are two concerns basically. While it may be possible in a private sector scenario, but it is definitely not possible in a hospital like ours where the patient load is in such numbers. And second, overall from the health perspective, I don't think it will give us a very good cost versus benefit ratio in terms of, while in certain individual patients it may be benefit, it can pick up lesions which may not be seen in naked eye, but overall from the health perspective, I think for overall population it may not offer us a very good cost versus benefit ratio.
Yeah. So if you have some doubt on clinical examination, then definitely it is indicated. But if there is no replacement for a good clinical examination, I think.
And another thing I wanted to make a point about OCT is in earlier, whatever nodular lesion or say a small tumor, we would be inclined to do ultrasound to see the characteristics of the tumor. But now, at least for the tumors which are at the posterior colon, maybe a little bit outside the arcades, before doing ultrasound, I always go for OCT, and OCT will tell you something about what is the location of the tumor, what are the internal characteristics. So that way, in certain scenarios, not in all, it is replacing ultrasound to a certain extent. Even the choroidal thickness can be better seen in certain scenarios.
I think I'll add to that in my talk about large lesions. But before that, let's go to Dr. Shaurya, who's assistant professor at RP Center, and he's doing a lot of retina work, ROP work, and uveitis work. So Shaurya, please enlighten us about imaging in uveitis. We can see your screen, but we can't hear you.
Just a second, sorry. Just a minute. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Rohan. And so I'll be speaking on imaging in uveitis and what all it may help in management. And so we already know that uveitis is just not the inflammation of the uveal tract and can also involve its adjoining structures. So we need a comprehensive assessment of all the structures to get to a diagnosis. Also, same diseases may have different manifestations. So similar, same disease might present as a anterior uveitis, might present as a posterior uveitis, and likewise, different diseases may look similar, and some of them may also have an overlap, like white dot syndrome. So often enough, it is confusing, and we need everything and anything that will help us to reach to a diagnosis. And it's since uveitis is a chronic entity, we need also on follow-up to pick up reactivation and complications. So basically we need imaging for all these things, and the imaging that we have at our disposal are these, and some of these have already been discussed. So we'll just move on with one investigation at a time, and then we'll discuss few cases. So how does OCT help? Well, we've already discussed how OCT helps. How it helps in uveitis? Well, it helps in stratifications, as everyone else said, and it shows which layers, or maybe which layer is involved specifically, and we get a very meticulous evaluation of the structure involved. So as we can see, where we can look for these vitreous cells that are there, posterior vitreous cells. We can look for a CME. We can look for all these subretinal fluid with subretinal fibrin. We can see for choroidal thickness, some hyperreflective material. And in cases where we do not have an access to the, not access, but we can't see the anterior chamber, in cases of corneal opacy, we might even look for some activity in the anterior chamber with the help of an ASOCT. In case of FA and ICG, well, these help us to in telling whether these whether the disease is either localized or it is generalized. It also helps us in telling at which level it is, either in the retina or the choroid. It can help also and guide us in management. If we see the NBs or large areas of CNPs. So a few examples, as we can see in the first photograph, we get this typical fawn type pattern, which is seen in Behçet's. We get these hypo spots, which we see in white dot syndromes. A disc leak that is there, which is seen in dysgranulomas, can be seen in sarcoid, and a petaloid appearance with the CME, and these small aneurysms that are there along the arterial vessel, which show it's an IRWAN, and obviously CNP and NV, which will guide our treatment. Going on to OCT, well, OCT has been discussed widely now, and the different thing that it shows in uveitis is basically shows flow deficits, which can be actually localized to either the retinal or the choroidal layers, and it also at times shows response to treatment, and it is the modality of choice for diagnosing a CNVM, which is an associated complication. Autofluorescence, well, it gives you the structural functional status of the RPE, and all the diseases that are involving the RPE will show activity in case of increased metabolic activity. And these also tend to show the lesions far better delineated on autofluorescence in comparison to other modalities. Now, this was the basic thing that what all we see on different modalities. Now we'll be taking up a few cases. So either we can do, we go for investigations when we want to confirm a diagnosis and we already had a suspicion of it, or for basic documentation to see how it is responding to our treatment. Also, we tend to do it in cases where we are not sure of the diagnosis and we need additional investigations to help us to come to a diagnosis, and in cases of follow-up where we can actually guide the treatment according to what we get on these modalities. So first, going to diagnosis confirmation. So the first case is a very simple case, and it was referred to our neurophthal clinic for disc edema. And on examination, retrodental cells were found, and they was referred to us. It was a case of intermediate uveitis, and when we did OCT, you can see that there is a CME. Then another case. Now we'll be discussing a few cases in relation to retina. The first case that we discuss is, as we can see, there's a focal retinitis patch with the arterial involvement and a serous detachment. And on OCT, you can see that there is hyperreflectivity of inner layers, as well as some places all the layers. So this is a case of a toxoplasma chorioretinopathy, and when we give treatment, you can see that there is resolution of this focal patch of retinitis, as well as decrease in reflectivity and thickness, and with time it actually becomes a hyperreflective scar. The next case of focal retinitis is where we see these focal retinitis patches with few hemorrhages. You can see a macular star and a serous detachment at the posterior pole. along the supratemporal arcade. Well, you can this case we diagnose it as a neuroretinitis, and it is aided with the help of OCT, where we can see these posterior vitreous cells and the hyperreflectivity of inner retinal layers and an NSD. And with treatment, as you can see, there is resolution of the retinitis. Another case of focal retinitis in which you get a plaque like a retinitis with some with hemorrhages as well as tortuosity of vessels. On OCT, it helps us to see this separation of ILM and necrosis of the retina, which is typically seen in a viral retinitis. So with antiviral therapy, you can see the resolution, and in the end, you can see the scar that is formed. Then we are going to go to another case in which we see a yellowish spot at the fovea. And when we do an OCT, we can see this hyperreflective material that is there at the level of the photoreceptors. And this is diagnosed as a case of acute retinal pigment epitheliitis. And with treatment, for that matter, it also at times regresses spontaneously, and you can see that there's reduction in the hyperreflective material. Then another similar case where you see these creamy flat lesions at the posterior pole with disc edema. On FA, you can see the late hyperfluorescence with disc edema. On ICG, you can see these hypospots and on OCT, you can see this disruption of photoreceptors and RP, which is seen in a case of APM-PPE. Then again, if you get a case in which you are seeing these multiple serous detachments with early hypofluorescence, with few pigment leaks and late pooling, as also was shown by Dr. Neha, you are seeing a case of VKH, and here you can see the multiple NSD with a subretinal fluid. Then again, if you see a case in which you are seeing these geographic creamy colored lesion with an advancing edge and a disc edema, and the other eye shows a healed choroiditis patch with a central scar. When you do an OCT, you see that the scar is a CNVM, and you can see the activity on OCT on the left eye as well. So this is a case of a serpiginous choroiditis. Moving on to a few cases of vasculitis. As you can see, this is an active vasculitis with cuffing of vessels, hemorrhages, and disc edema as well. To see which type of vascular involvement is there, we can go ahead with a FFA, and we can see that it's mainly a periphlebitis. It would be a sarcoid. On treatment with steroids, you can see that there is resolution. Moving on to the next case. Well, you can see there's some media hazes there, there's vitritis, and there's a focal patch of retinitis with a hemorrhage. But when we went ahead and did a FFA, you can see these perivascular hyperfluorescence, and in late phases, you increase it to a typical fawn pattern, which is suggestive of a Behçet's disease. Then another case in which you see this NVE that is there along with these twisted arteries, and when you go in for an FA, you can see that these are the arterial aneurysm that you see at mostly noted at the bifurcation of these arteries, and you get a diagnosis of IRWAN. Going on to another case, here we see that there is retinal whitening and associated some vitreous hemorrhage. Whether these are cotton wool spots, no, but this is a Purshar flecken, which is seen in cases of Purshar retinopathy, commonly associated with trauma, but it can also be associated with collagen vascular diseases where it is called Purshar-like retinopathy. As you can see on the FA, there is only peripheral perfused retina, and rest is all capillary non-perfusion. Then another case in which we see a focal yellowish lesion that is there at the posterior pole, you might diagnose it as a choroiditis, might diagnose it as a CSR, and when you see it on OCT, there is increased choroidal thickness with some subretinal fluid and posterior vitreous cells. And when you do go ahead and do a USG, you can see there is increased choroidal thickness with suprachoroidal fluid, and you have come to a diagnosis of posterior scleritis. So these were ones which we already suspected the case, a diagnosis, and we just confirmed it. Then we go on to some few diagnostic dilemmas. Well, the first case, we see these retinochoroidal folds, some infolding of the retina is seen, disc edema is seen, there is a foveal fold as well. On OCT, you can see these vitreous cells, obtunded disc and foveal fold. And when you do a ultrasound, you can see that there is increased choroidal thickness with a suprachoroidal fluid, giving you a T sign. With treatment, you can see that it has resolved. Another case in which you see this yellowish spot at fovea, as I showed you before, and on OCT, you can see this hyperreflectivity at the level of the photoreceptor and the RP, and you're thinking that it is probably a diagnosis of acute retinoid pigment epitheliitis. And with time, you can see that it has now transformed into a geographic lesion, and more with loss of photoreceptor, with the thinning more suggestive of a macular serpiginous choroiditis. Now, another case in which you get vitritis and you get these patches at the posterior pole, and when you go in and do an OCT, you just find these subretinal RP deposits with the intact Brooks membrane and no CME, and then you are seeing a case which is not exactly uveitis, and it's a masquerader. And when you go ahead and do a FFA, you can see these leopard spotting suggestive of lymphoma. Then lastly, going to follow up, well, we can look for activity, like in this case, we can, fundus autofluorescence can show some hyperautofluorescence, which might show activity. Then going on for documentation of resolution, in which you can see that the serous detachment has now resolved. You can see for treatment response, this case of IRWAN, in which we did photocoagulation and now it has resolved, or else when we need to go in for additional treatment where there is still persistent NVE and we need to augment it with laser. So thank you. And lastly, as you can look for complications on an OCTA, like I said, the CNVM. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shaurya. So like you have shown, first of all, OCT and other modalities, they help us detect where the initial pathology is, whether it is retinal, choroidal, it is going retinochoroidal, or it is going chorioretinal. And not just that, it can also show us sublayers of the pathology, like it AP, MPP, and serpiginous. You will have choriocapillary involvement, which you can detect on OCT angiography or even on an OCT. Whereas the other cases of MUDES that you showed, there the choroid is normal and the primary inflammation is at the level of the photoreceptors. So the ISOS junction and the photoreceptor line will show you subtle changes. So even the sublayer changes can be detected, and we can be a little more sure of our diagnosis and plan treatment accordingly. And then, like you said, planning of treatment, where all the capillary non-perfusion areas are, how much is the inflammation, can help us decide on our steroid therapy, duration of steroid therapy, as well as where and all where the laser needs to be added, and secondary complications like choroidal neovascular membrane. So these imaging modalities do help us in quite a few cases. Any other comments from any other panelists?
I think one of the differences really where Okta has made in terms of uveitis is differentiating between different types of white dot syndromes. So though not conclusively proven, it has been shown by some authors that the pathology in APMPP versus MUDES is a little different. While in one, it's primary photoreceptor abnormality as seen in MUDES, while in APMPP, it is primary choriocapillaris abnormality. Like other serpiginous also shows primary choriocapillaris abnormality. So that may be one reason why the two entities behave different. But in long term, both of them recover well and they lead to good visual recovery. So I don't know how we go from here, but that is just the beginning of our understanding that how the two entities originate basically.
Yes. And another thing I have found of interest is in cases of retinitis, We have also had a publication on that, various features of viral retinitis, post-fever retinitis, and toxoplasma retinitis. There are subtle differences in the clinical presentation as well as the OCT findings, which might help us differentiate between these conditions as well. And I think Dr. Shaurya showed us all these three varieties of retinitis. Any comments, Dr. Shaurya?
No, I think I've mostly covered everything, and I think uveitis itself is a conundrum. So anything that helps us in the diagnosis is a boon actually. And as Dr. Vinod was saying, that it actually gives us to the minutest of level that which actually which layer is involved. It actually helps us and aids us in diagnosis, as I showed in one of the cases, that from a outer photoreceptor inflammation, it went on to then an RP and a choriocapillary one. So it gives the whole evolution if picked early. So it's definitely a boon.
I think, should I go on to the next talk? Next, I would be presenting on large lesions of the chorioretina. I'm Dr. Rohan. I'm also Associate Professor at RP Center. Okay, so can imaging help us with these large lesions? So as I have been emphasizing all along, that first and foremost is clinical assessment. Just like you would do for any surgical case, the contour of the lesion, the shape, the height, the color, margins, and the associated changes along with these lesions. Am I audible and is the screen visible?
Yes, Dr. Rohan, go on.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the presence of associated findings such as hard exudates, pigmentary changes, and all that will help us finally make a clincher diagnosis, as well as the relevant systemic history. So to what we can see to the morphology of the lesion, OCT adds on to it because it gives us the microanatomy of the lesion. So even the sublayer involvement and the extent of involvement, like we have already discussed, becomes much better delineated. And how that lesion has a relation to the retinal or the choroidal vasculature, or it does have an intrinsic vasculature or not, is also important to tell us about what the lesion is. Then thirdly, it might be altering the function of the retinal pigment epithelium, and how that gets altered is also reflected by changes in OCT and fundus autofluorescence. So now coming to a few cases. Now this is quite a straightforward case, a pigmented large mass dome-shaped lesion, which is like a choroidal melanoma. So what does other imaging add? So if we do a fluorescein angiography, you'll be able to see the vascular network of the retina, as well as we appreciate hyperfluorescence within the lesion. Though here we can't see clear vessels within, but melanomas are supposed to have a vascular nature and a double circulation. Another example here of a pigmented mass, and here you can see the ultrasound B scan on the other side. So here it is a typical dumbbell shaped lesion, and you can also see the A scan along with it. It has an initial high reflectivity which suddenly drops. So this is the high angle kappa. The initial high spike is because of the retinal spike, and subsequently the internal reflectivity is lower. This is again diagnostic of a choroidal melanoma. So this case came to us again with a mass which was not of that much pigmentary changes in it. So we did further investigations. We found that on OCT, there were choroidal mounds and this lumpy, bumpy appearance with some fluid, but the overlying retina was normal. On doing an angiography, we find that initially it is hypo, it is blocking the choroidal fluorescence. Later on, some dye is leaking into the mass with these subtle speckles of hyperfluorescence. This case was actually found to have a metastasis, a lung carcinoma. And then subsequently on treatment with chemotherapy, there was good resolution of this mass. We see that all the lumpy bumpiness is gone, the pigmentary changes still stay, but the retina has returned back to normal position and good visual recovery. So here I just want to highlight that we have seen such pinpoint fluorescent changes adjacent to metastasis, sometimes over the mass or sometimes just adjacent to the mass, which probably might indicate some micrometastasis, though you can't take it as a diagnostic feature. Now here there is again a large mass which is a little bit pigmented. This was diagnosed at our center 2 years back as a hemangioma. But then the patient when came to me was PL negative, and the mass is now totally obscuring the disc and has developed some pigmentation. So which made me think that maybe there is something wrong going on here. I have not seen a hemangioma go PL negative. So we did the imaging. So there are just secondary changes in the retina, cystic changes because of the long standing duration of the mass. It doesn't give us much information. The ultrasound B scan also not typical of a melanoma. That is why probably it was confused in the first case. It is more of a homogeneous reflectivity. So when you have a doubt with imaging, the answer is something else. So even the angiography is little confusing, because here even in the ICG you see that there is some internal vascularity to this mass, and this is not very typical of hemangioma, which I'll show you later on. So when there is a diagnostic dilemma, what we do is we go ahead with a diagnostic biopsy. So here we just make 2 ports. One I made 23 gauge, through which I put a 24 gauge needle. From the other I have put a light pipe. We're just going directly into the mass. There might be a little bleeding, but that is not of too much concern. Most of the time it stops. And even the opening that we make with the 24 gauge needle does not cause a retinal detachment. With a little bit of sideways movement, we try and suck and try to take a little bit of material into our syringe, and whatever it comes in the hub we send for cytology, and this case actually came out to be a melanoma. Now, even if you don't have access to Optos or other diagnostic imaging techniques, you can do imaging just with a smartphone and a 20D. Here, with this is Dr. Abhidnya had sent me this case, where again you see that there is this mass, which the margins are not very well defined and rather irregular. It has RP changes and some hemorrhages. And you see again these subtle dots adjacent to the mass. So again, in this patient, what is the diagnosis? The ultrasound not very typical of a melanoma or a hemangioma. So what we did is we took further history. The patient had some history of weight loss, and in view of these irregular sort of mass with these changes, we kept metastasis as #1 diagnosis and the others as a differential diagnosis. And on CT scan, this patient was again diagnosed as having a lung malignancy. So a careful clinical examination with correlation with the systemic findings leads to a diagnosis in many cases. Now here in this fundus picture, if you see, you might not find anything, but there is a subtle mass over here, which is of the color is similar to the choroid. Now, if you do OCT angiography, you see that it has branching pattern of vascular network within. And OCT of the fovea is showing that it is causing a neurosensory detachment, which is probably what brought the patient to us. Now, this is the fluorescein angiography of a hemangioma, where you see patchy hyperfluorescence, because it has a cavernous hemangioma, so it has caverns. So wherever they will fill, you will get the patchy sort of hyperfluorescence, not a very diffuse hyperfluorescence. And ultrasound is very typical, where you see a smooth dome-shaped mass with merging with the surrounding choroid, and it has a homogeneous sort of moderate internal reflectivity. So this is choroidal hemangioma, and this we treated with focal laser, and there is a drastic reduction of subretinal fluid and significant improvement in vision. Another case of choroidal hemangioma. Now here I want to highlight the OCT, because you see, you can see a choroidal mass here, and you can still see some pattern of choroidal vasculature. So the choroidal vasculature, it may not be the normal choroidal vasculature, it may be the vasculature of the mass which is being reflected here, but this shows that it has vasculature and not totally obscuring the choroidal imaging as seen in other masses. So a white mass with a variegated appearance, more flat. What is it? Now you do an OCT here. So here you see there are lamellar sort of arrangement, and it is obscuring the vascular pattern. And the mass here is not pushing the retina up, it is rather pushing the sclera back. And it also has a deep choroidal trench here. This is little atypical, which we found in only one case. But this is more typical of an osteoma. But the diagnostic hallmark here again would probably be an ultrasound. This is another case, but in ultrasound, you will get this high spike of calcification. So these large masses, ultrasound would be diagnostic of a choroidal osteoma. Now again, dome-shaped sort of convex mass. But if you see carefully here, the margins, they are little blurred and they are merging into the surrounding. They are not as sharp as in the cases of metastasis and other tumors which I showed you. And on OCT, you again have a dome shape, but you have some spillover of hyperreflective material into the outer layers. So this mostly happens when there is an inflammation, and that inflammation is now spilling over from the choroid into the retina. This patient on CT had some lymph nodes, which was detected to be tubercular. We treated with ATT and a combination of steroids, and we got good resolution. And you see, since the retina is mostly normal, there is good resolution of vision here. Again, a case where the margins are little diffuse and merging with the surrounding, and you also have subretinal fluid and sort of an abscess. Again, this patient turned out to be tubercular, treated with ATT. Now here see so much of spillover in same patient, so much of spillover into the retina that it is causing distortion of the retinal architecture. And after ATT, there is good resolution with pigmentary changes only. But since the retinal architecture is not good, visual recovery was not very good. Now through the haze, we can see this yellowish patch. Fortunately, in a swept OCT, we could get an image through it, again showing us that it is choroidal in nature with probably secondary retinal involvement. This patient, the other eye, we could see nothing. There was total vitreous haze, but the patient had given history of tuberculosis about 8 or 9 months back. So I suspected maybe the patient treatment was incomplete or partial. And we started empirical ATT, and it resolved very well, leaving just this atrophic patch here. And to our surprise, even the other eye cleared. And it also shows these two probably healed tubercular granulomas, and patient also recovered some vision in this eye. Initially, I could not see the fundus in this eye. Another case of a granuloma here in the choroid with some spillover, again a case of tuberculosis. As opposed to this, you see again yellowish lesions, but they appear little quieter. You have the change on the OCT. This is a granuloma, but no spillover into the retina. So probably something which is little less aggressive. I think it is a case of presumed sarcoid, although we could not find any definite evidence, but we treated with steroids. And again, you see that on clinical picture, there are just atrophic changes, but OCT shows us that that granuloma is gone, and again, just left some altered choroidal vessels there. Now, this patient was referred to me again as a tuberculoma. But you see, there are so many hard exudates and some hemorrhages. So why would hard exudates come unless there is a significant vascular component to the lesion? Now you do an OCT and you see that the lesion is predominantly in the retina itself. It is not in the choroid. So this is no way a choroidal tuberculoma. The OCT is showing you the cystoid changes and the NSD at the macula. You do an angiography and you find again that the lesion is actually highly vascular. And this is a case of a capillary hemangioblastoma peripapillary. So these are similar to retinal angiomas, but they don't appear like those red cherries, which are characteristic of peripheral angiomas, whereas these posterior lesions appear more of a yellowish orange with a fibrillar network of vessels over it, causing exudation at the macula. This is not again tuberculoma, but investigations tell you it is a retinal lesion, it is a vascular lesion. Now, this is a patient which is a known case of tuberous sclerosis. Again with these white patches. So what is the level of the lesion? Although if you look carefully, you'll be able to see some obscuration of retinal vessels. So it is in the retina itself. But OCT immediately confirms that it involves the inner layers of the retina. And these are cases of, this is a astrocytoma in tuberous sclerosis. Now, soon after I had seen that patient of tuberous sclerosis, I got this patient with this white patch here, again obscuring the retinal vessels. So is it again an astrocytoma or a gliotic mass there? So this patient gave his recent history of loss of vision in the right eye, but otherwise also had history of decreased night vision. So you can see these pigmentary changes. So patient already has retinitis pigmentosa, but has developed probably this mild haze in the right eye because the right fundus image is not very clear, some mild vitritis, this white lesion, and if you see carefully, petaloid changes at the fovea. You do an OCT, you do get cystoid edema at the fovea, and you do get a retinal lesion here. So what is it? Is it astrocytoma? So, but considering the cells, the cystoid macular edema, the vitreous haze, we took it as an inflammatory retinal granuloma happening there and treated it with steroids. And as you can see, once we are treating it with steroids, there is a total resolution of that patch, and just some distortion in the retinal layers is left. So this is just a retinal or maybe a more of a retinal granuloma there because of inflammation. So imaging helps us to locate the lesion, follow up the lesion, and in treatment. So to conclude, all that we have been saying earlier, to say it again, it tells you whether it is a retinal lesion, choroidal lesion, or it is a retinochoroidal, chorioretinal, and what is the nature of the lesion, inflammatory, neoplastic, vascular, and whether it is active or whether it is healed, and the secondary changes which have been shown nicely by other presenters in OCT angiography, like choroidal neovascular membrane and CME. So you have to correlate with all this, and that will finally lead you to a clinical diagnosis. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would request for some comments from other panelists. We have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Rohan. That was a very nice. You showed a variety of lesions. And I think the basic message is very clear here, that never go after one modality. You always base your decision on multiple imaging modalities. And I think whenever we focus on imaging, we should not forget that the clinical pictures, clinical details of the patients remain paramount. The basic clinical examination of the patient in terms of whether there is any history of weight loss, the other systemic history, and then last but not the least, basic signs in the eye in terms of signs of inflammation, etc. can give you a very important clue towards the diagnosis of the patient.
Thank you. I would like to thank Dr. Neha, Dr. Abhidnya, Dr. Vinod, and Dr. Shaurya for being part of this. And I hope those who have been listening, we have presented some cases and you got some learning points from those. Thank you very much, and thank you, AIOS.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohan, for conducting this session and leading throughout the session. You've been a wonderful leader. Thank you so much, all the participants. Have a great